Everyone loves to listen to a good book, and there are so many wonderful ones to choose, so we decided to bring you this podcast of Stories Come to Life. Each episode features a story from either classic or modern literature, especially chosen to be interesting and exciting to hear. So sit back, relax, and listen to this story come to life. Welcome to Stories Come to Life. I am your host, Kathryn Lopez Luker. Sometimes it's hard to remember that Polly is still just a young woman who wants to have fun and enjoy life. She seems so grown up and responsible. But one night, she just wants to enjoy herself. Not surprisingly, she has a wonderful time. But poor Fanny, who has grown up all too quickly, is tired of everything. When Polly takes her to meet some young women who are working hard to achieve something in their lives, it gives Fanny a glimpse of a new and different and better kind of life. Now sit back, relax, and listen to this story come to life. An Old-Fashioned Girl by Louisa May Alcott. Chapter 12. Forbidden Fruit. "I'm perfectly aching for some fun," said Polly to herself as she opened her window one morning, and the sunshine and frosty air set her blood dancing and her eyes sparkling with youth, health, and overflowing spirits. "I really must break out somewhere and have a good time. It's quite impossible to keep steady any longer. Now, what will I do?" Polly sprinkled crumbs to the doves, who came daily to be fed, and while she watched the gleaming necks and rosy feet, she racked her brain to devise some unusually delightful way of enjoying herself, for she really had bottled up her spirits so long they were in a state of uncontrollable effervescence. "I'll go to the opera," she suddenly announced to the doves. "It's expensive, I know, but it's remarkably good, and music is such a treat to me. Yes, I'll get 2 tickets as cheap as I can, and send a note to Will, poor lad. He needs fun as much as I do. And we'll go and have a nice time in some corner, as Charles Lamb and his sister used to." With that, Polly slammed down the window, to the dismay of her gentle little pensioners, and began to fly about with great energy, singing and talking to herself, as if it was impossible to keep quiet. She started early to her first lesson that she might have time to buy the tickets, hoping, as she put a $5 bill into her purse, that they wouldn't be very high, for she felt she was not in a mood to resist temptation. But she was spared any struggle, for when she reached the place, the ticket office was blocked up by eager purchasers, and the disappointed faces that turned away told Polly there was no hope for her. "Well, I don't care. I'll go somewhere, for I will have my fun," she said, with great determination, for disappointment only seemed to whet her appetite. But the playbills showed her nothing inviting, and she was forced to go away to her work with the money burning her pocket and all manner of wild schemes floating in her head. At noon, instead of going home to dinner, she went and took an ice, trying to feel very happy and festive all by herself. It was rather a failure, however, and after a tour of the picture shops, she went to give Maud a lesson, feeling that it was very hard to quench her longings and subside into a prim little music teacher. Fortunately, she did not have to do violence to her feelings very long, for the first thing that Fanny said to her was, "Can you go?" "Where?" "Didn't you get my note?" "I didn't go home to dinner." "Tom wants us to go to the opera tonight, and—" Fan got no further, for Polly uttered a cry of rapture and clasped her hands. "Go! Of course I will! I've been dying to go all day and tried to get tickets this morning and couldn't. I've been fuming about it ever since, and oh, now, how splendid!" And Polly could not restrain an ecstatic skip, for this burst of joy rather upset her. "Well, you come to tea and we'll dress together and go all comfortable with Tom, who's in a heavenly frame of mind today." "I must run home and get my things," said Polly, resolving on the spot to buy the nicest pair of gloves the city afforded. You shall have my white cloak and any other little rigging you want. Tommy likes to have his ladies a credit to him, you know," said Fanny, departing to take a beauty sleep. Polly instantly decided that she wouldn't borrow Becky's best bonnet, as she at first intended, but get a new one, for in her present excited state, no extravagance seemed too prodigal in honor of this grand occasion. I am afraid that Maud's lesson was not as thorough as it should have been, for Polly's head was in such a chaos of bonnets, gloves, opera cloaks, and fans, that Maud blundered through, murdering time and tune at her own sweet will. The instant it was over, Polly rushed away and bought not only the kid gloves, but a bonnet frame, a bit of illusion, and a pink crepe rose, which had tempted her for weeks in a certain shop window. Then home and to work with all the skill and speed of a distracted milliner. I'm rushing madly into expense, I'm afraid, but the fit is on me, and I'll eat bread and water for a week to make up for it. I must look nice, for Tom seldom takes me and ought to be gratified when he does. I want to do like other girls just for once, and enjoy myself without thinking about right and wrong. Now a bit of pink ribbon to tie it with, and I shall be done in time to do up my best collar," she said, turning her boxes topsy-turvy for the necessary ribbon, in that delightful flurry which young ladies feel on such occasions. Maud happened to be playing a bohemian tune in the parlour, and Polly came prancing into the room, so evidently spoiling for a dance, that Tom, who was there, found it impossible to resist catching her about the waist, and putting her through the most intricate evolutions, till Maud's fingers gave out. "Oh, that was splendid! Oh, Tom, thank you so much for asking me tonight. I feel just like having a regular good time," cried Polly, when she stopped with her hat hanging round her neck, and her hair looking as if she had been out in a high wind. "Glad of it. I felt so myself, and thought we ought to have a jolly little party all in the family," said Tom, looking much gratified at her delight. "Is Trix sick?" asked Polly. "Gone to New York for a week." "Ah, when the cat's away, the mice will play." "Exactly. Come and have another turn." Before they could start, however, the awful spectacle of a little dog trotting out of the room with a paper parcel in his mouth made Polly clasp her hands with a despairing cry, "My bonnet! Oh, my bonnet!" "Where? What? Which?" And Tom looked about him bewildered. "Snip's got it! Save it! Save it!" "I will." And Tom gave chase with more vigor than discretion. Snip, evidently regarding it as a game got up for his special benefit, enjoyed the race immensely, and scampered all over the house, shaking the precious parcel like a rat, while his master ran and whistled, commanded and coaxed in vain. Polly followed, consumed with anxiety, and Maud laughed till Mrs. Shaw sent down to know who was in hysterics. A piteous yelp from the lower regions at last announced that the thief was captured, and Tom appeared bearing Snip by the nape of the neck in one hand, and Polly's cherished bonnet in the other. "The little scamp was just going to worry it when I grabbed him. I'm afraid he has eaten one of your gloves. I can't find it, and this one is pretty well chewed up," said Tom, bereaving Snip of the torn kid glove, to which he still clung. "Serves me right," said Polly with a groan. "I'd no business to get a new pair, but I wanted to be extra gorgeous tonight, and this is my punishment for such mad extravagance." "Was there anything else?" asked Tom. "Only my best cuffs and collar. You'll probably find them in the coal bin," said Polly, with the calmness of despair. "I saw some little white things on the dining-room floor as I raced through. Go get 'em, Maud, and we'll repair damages," said Tom, shutting the culprit into the boot-closet, where he placidly rolled himself up and went to sleep. "They're not hurt a bit," proclaimed Maud, restoring the lost treasures. "Neither is my bonnet, for which I'm deeply grateful," said Polly, who had been examining it with a solicitude which made Tom's eyes twinkle. "So am I, for it strikes me that is an uncommonly nobby little affair," he said approvingly. Tom had a weakness for pale pink roses, and perhaps Polly knew it. "I'm afraid it's too colorful and bright," said Polly with a dubious look. "Not a bit. Sort of bridal, you know. Must be becoming. Put it on and let's see." "I wouldn't for the world with my hair all tumbling down. Don't look at me till I'm respectable, and don't tell anyone how I've been acting. I think I must be a little crazy tonight," said Polly, gathering up her rescued finery and preparing to go find Fan. "Lunacy is mighty becoming, Polly. Try it again," answered Tom, watching her as she went away laughing, looking all the prettier for her dishevelment. "Dress that girl up and she'll be a raving, tearing beauty," added Tom to Maud in a lower tone as he took her into the parlor under his arm. Polly heard it and instantly resolved to be as raving and as tearing as her means would allow, just for one night, she said, as she peeped over the banisters, glad to see that the dance and the race had taken the bandy-boxy air out of Tom's elegant array. The friends had a social cup of tea upstairs, which Polly considered the height of luxury, and then each took a mirror and proceeded to prink to her heart's content. The earnestness with which Polly made her toilette that night was delightful to behold. Feeling in a daring mood, she released her pretty hair from the braids in which she usually wore it, and permitted the curls to display themselves in all their brown abundance, especially several dangerous little ones about the temples and forehead. The putting on of the rescued collar and cuffs was a task which absorbed her whole mind. So was the settling of a minute bit of court plaster just to the left of the dimple in her chin, an unusual piece of coquetry in which Polly would not have indulged if an almost invisible scratch had not given her an excuse for doing it. The white, down-trimmed cloak with certain imposing ornaments on the hood was assumed with becoming gravity and draped with much advancing and retreating before the glass, as its wearer practiced the true Boston gait, elbows back, shoulders forward, a bend and a slide, occasionally varied by a slight skip. But when that bonnet went on, Polly actually held her breath till it was safely landed, and the pink rose bloomed above the smooth waves of hair with what Fanny called a ravishing effect. At this successful stage of affairs, Polly found it impossible to resist the loan of a pair of gold bands for the wrists, and Fanny's white fan with the little mirror in the middle. "I can put them in my pocket if I feel too much dressed," said Polly as she snapped on the bracelets. But after a wave or two of the fan, she felt that it would be impossible to take them off till the evening was over, so enticing was their glitter. Fanny also lent her a pair of 3-button gloves, which completed her content, and when Tom greeted her with an approving, "Here's a sight for gods and men! Why, Polly, you're gorgeous!" she felt that her fun had decidedly begun. "Wouldn't Polly make a lovely bride?" said Maud, who was revolving about the two girls, trying to decide whether she would have a blue or a white cloak when she grew up and went to operas. "Faith, and she would. Allow me to congratulate you, Mrs. Sidney," added Tom, advancing with his wedding reception bow and a wicked look at Fanny. "Go away! How dare you!" cried Polly, growing much redder than her rose. "If we are going to be going to the opera tonight, perhaps we'd better start, as the carriage has been waiting some time," observed Fan coolly, and sailed out of the room in an unusually lofty manner. "Don't you like it, Polly?" whispered Tom as they went downstairs together. "Very much. The deuce you do." "I'm so fond of music. How can I help it?" "I'm talking about Sid." "Well, I'm not." "You better try for him." "I'll think of it." "Oh, Polly, Polly, what are you coming to?" "A tumble into the street, apparently," answered Polly, as she slipped a little on the step, and Tom stopped in the middle of his laugh to pilot her safely into the carriage, where Fanny was already seated. "Here's richness," said Polly to herself as she rolled away, feeling as Cinderella probably did when the pumpkin coach bore her to her first ball. Only Polly had 2 princes to think about, and poor Cinderella on that occasion had not even one. Fanny didn't seem inclined to talk much, and Tom would go on in such a ridiculous manner that Polly told him she wouldn't listen and began to hum bits of the opera. But she heard every word nevertheless, and resolved to pay him for his impertinence as soon as possible by showing him what he had lost. Their seats were in the balcony, and hardly were they settled when, by one of those remarkable coincidences which are continually occurring in our youth, Mr. Sidney and Fanny's old friend Frank Moore took their place just behind them. "Oh, you villain! You did it on purpose," whispered Polly, as she turned from greeting their neighbors and saw a droll look on Tom's face. "I give you my word I didn't. It's the law of attraction, don't you see?" "If Fan likes it, I don't care." "She looks resigned, I think." She certainly did, for she was talking and laughing in the most animated manner with Frank, while Sidney was covertly surveying Polly, as if he didn't quite understand how the grey grub got so suddenly transformed into a white butterfly. It is a well-known fact that dress plays a very important part in the lives of most women, and even the most sensible cannot help owning sometimes how much happiness they owe to a becoming gown, gracefully arranged hair, or a bonnet which brings out the best points in their faces and puts them in a good humor. A great man was once heard to say that what first attracted him to his well-beloved wife was seeing her in a white muslin dress with a blue shawl on the chair behind her. The dress caught his eye, and stopping to admire that, the wearer's intelligent conversation interested his mind, and in time the woman's sweetness won his heart. It is not the finest dress which does the most execution, I fancy, but that which best interprets individual taste and character. Wise people understand this, and everybody is more influenced by it than they know, perhaps. Polly was not very wise, but she felt that every one about her found something more attractive than usual in her, and modestly attributed Tom's devotion, Sidney's interest, and Frank's undisguised admiration to the new bonnet, or more likely to that delightful combination of cashmere, silk, and swan's down, which, like Charity's mantle, seemed to cover a multitude of sins in other people's eyes, and exalt the little music teacher to the rank of a young lady. Polly scoffed at this sort of thing sometimes, but tonight she accepted it without a murmur, rather enjoyed it, in fact, let her bracelets shine before the eyes of all men, and felt that it was good to seem comely in their sight. She forgot one thing, however, that her own happy spirits gave the crowning charm to a picture which everyone liked to see, a blithe young girl enjoying herself with all her heart. The music and the light, costume and company excited Polly, and made many things possible, which at most times she would never have thought of saying or doing. She did not mean to flirt, but somehow it flirted itself, and she couldn't help it. For once started, it was hard to stop, with Tom goading her on, and Sidney looking at her with that new interest in his eyes. Polly's flirting was such a very mild imitation of the fashionable thing that Trix and company would not have recognized it, but it did very well for a beginner, and Polly understood that night wherein the fascination of it lay, for she felt as if she had found a new gift all of a sudden, and was learning how to use it, knowing that it was dangerous, yet finding its chief charm in that very fact. Tom didn't know what to make of her at first, though he thought the change uncommonly becoming, and finally decided that Polly had taken his advice, and was setting her cap for Sid, as he gracefully expressed it. Sidney, being a modest man, thought nothing of the kind, but simply fancied that little Polly was growing up to be a very charming woman. He had known her since her first visit, and had always liked the child. This winter he had been interested in the success of her plans, and had done what he could to help them. But he never thought of falling in love with Polly till that night. Then he began to feel that he had not fully appreciated his young friend, that she was such a bright and lovable girl. It was a pity she should not always be charming and pretty, and enjoy herself, that she would make a capital wife for somebody, and perhaps it was about time to think of settling, as his sister often said. These thoughts came and went as he watched the white figure in front, felt the enchantment of the music, and found everybody unusually blithe and beautiful. He had heard the opera many times, but it had never seemed so fine before. Perhaps because he had never happened to have had an ingenuous young face so near to him, in which the varying emotions, born of the music and the romance it portrayed, came and went so eloquently that it was impossible to help reading them. Polly did not know that this was why he leaned down so often to speak to her, with an expression which she did not understand, but liked very much nonetheless. "Don't shut your eyes, Polly. They're so full of mischief tonight I like to see them," said Tom, after idly wondering for a minute if she knew how long and curly her lashes were. "I don't wish to look affected, but the music tells the story so much better than the acting that I don't care to look on half the time," answered Polly, hoping Tom wouldn't see the tears she had so cleverly suppressed. "Now I like the acting best. The music is all very fine, I know, but it does seem so absurd for people to go around telling tremendous secrets at the top of their voices. I can't get used to it." "That's because you've more common sense than romance. I don't mind the absurdity, and quite long to go comfort that poor girl with the broken heart," said Polly, with a sigh as the curtain fell on a most affecting tableau. "What's-his-name is a great jack not to see that she adores him. In real life we fellows ain't such bats as all that," observed Tom, who had decided opinions on many subjects that he knew very little about, and expressed them with great candor. A curious smile passed over Polly's face, and she put up her glass to hide her eyes as she said, "I think you are bats sometimes, but women are taught to wear masks, and that accounts for it, I suppose." "I don't agree. There's precious little masking nowadays. Wish there was a little more sometimes," added Tom, thinking of several blooming damsels whose beseeching eyes had begged him not to leave them to wither on the parent stem. "I hope not, but I guess there's a good deal more than anyone would suspect." "What can you know about broken hearts and blighted beings?" asked Sidney, smiling at the girl's pensive tone. Polly glanced up at him, and her face dimpled and shone again as she answered, laughing, "Ha! Not much. My time is to come." "I can't imagine you walking about the world with your back hair down, bewailing a hard-hearted lover," said Tom. "Neither can I. That wouldn't be my way." "No. Miss Polly would let concealment prey on her damask cheeks, and still smile on in the novel fashion, or turn Sister of Charity, and nurse the heartless lover through smallpox, or some other contagious disease, and die, leaving him to the agonies of remorse and tardy love." Polly gave Sidney an indignant look as he said that, in a slow, satirical way that nettled her very much, for she hated to be thought sentimental. "That's not my way either," she said decidedly. "I'd try to outlive it, and if I couldn't, I'd try to be the better for it. Disappointment needn't make a woman a fool." "Nor an old maid if she's pretty and good. Remember that, and don't visit the sins of one blockhead on all the rest of mankind," said Tom, laughing at her earnestness. "I don't think there's the slightest possibility of Miss Polly's being either," added Sidney with a look which made it evident that concealment had not seriously damaged Polly's damask cheek as yet. "There's Clara Bird. I haven't seen her but once since she was married. How pretty she looks." And Polly retired behind the big glass again, thinking that the chat was becoming rather personal. "Now there's a girl who tried a different cure for unrequited affection from any you mention. People say she was fond of Belle's brother. He didn't reciprocate, but went off to India to spoil his constitution. So Clara married a man 20 years older than she is, and consoles herself by being the best-dressed woman in the city." "That accounts for it," said Polly, when Tom's long whisper ended. "For what?" "The tired look in her eyes." "Don't see it," said Tom, after a survey through the glass. "I didn't expect you would." "I see what you mean. A good many women have it nowadays, said Sidney over Polly's shoulder. What's she tired of, the old gentleman? Asked Tom. And herself, added Polly. You've been reading French novels, I know you have. That's just the way the heroines go on, cried Tom. I haven't read one, but it's evident you have, young man, and you'd better stop. I don't care for 'em, only do it to keep up my French. But how came you to be so wise, ma'am? Observation, sir. I like to watch faces, and I seldom see a grown-up one that looks perfectly happy. True for you, Polly. No more you do, now I think of it. I don't know but one that always looks so, and there it is. Where? Asked Polly with interest. Look straight before you and you'll see it. Polly did look, but all she saw was her own face in the little mirror of the fan, which Tom held up and peeped over with a laugh in his eyes. Do I look happy? I'm glad of that. And Polly surveyed herself with care. Both young men thought it was girlish vanity and smiled at its naive display, but Polly was looking for something deeper than beauty, and was glad not to find it. Rather a pleasant little prospect, hey, Polly? My bonnet is straight, and that's all I care about. Did you ever see a picture of Beau Brummel? Asked Polly quickly. No. Well, there he is modernized. And turning the fan, she showed him himself. Any more portraits in your gallery? Asked Sidney, as if he liked to share all the nonsense going. One more. What do you call it? The Portrait of a Gentleman. And the little glass reflected a gratified face for the space of 2 seconds. Thank you. I'm glad I don't disgrace my name, said Sidney, looking down into the merry blue eyes that thanked him silently for many of the small kindnesses that women could never forget. Very good, Polly, you're getting on fast, whispered Tom, clapping his yellow kid gloves approvingly. Be quiet. Dear me, how warm it is. And Polly gave him a frown that delighted his soul. Come out and have an ice. We shall have time. Fan is so absorbed I couldn't think of disturbing her, said Polly. Fancying that her friend was enjoying the evening as much as she was a great mistake, by the way, for Fan was acting for effect, and though she longed to turn and enjoy them, wouldn't do it, unless a certain person showed signs of missing her. He didn't, and Fanny chatted on, raging inwardly over her disappointment, and wondering how Polly could be so silly and selfish. It was delicious to see the little airs Polly put on, for she felt as if she were somebody else and acting a part. She leaned back as if quite oppressed by the heat, permitted Sidney to fan her, and paid him for the service by giving him a flower from her bouquet, proceedings which amused Tom immensely, even while it piqued him a little to be treated like an old friend who didn't count. Go in and win, Polly. I'll give you my blessing, he whispered, as the curtain rose again. It's only a part of the fun, so don't you laugh, you disrespectful boy, she whispered back in a tone never used toward Sidney. Tom didn't quite like the way in which she treated him, and the word boy disturbed his dignity, for he was almost 21, and Polly ought to treat him with more respect. Sidney, at the same moment, was wishing he was in Tom's place, young, comely, and such a familiar friend that Polly would scold and lecture him in the delightful way she did, while Polly forgot them both when the music began, and left them ample time to look at her and think about themselves. While they waited to get out when all was over, Polly heard Fan whisper to Tom, What do you think Trix will say to this? What do you mean? Why, the way you've been going on tonight. Don't know and don't care. It's only Polly. That's the very thing. She can't bear P. Well, I can, and I don't see why I shouldn't enjoy myself as well as Trix. You'll get used to enjoying yourself too much if you're not careful. Polly's waked up. I'm glad of it, and so's Sid. I only spoke for your good. Don't trouble yourself about me. I get lecturing enough in another quarter, and can't stand any more. Come, Polly. She took the arm he offered her, but her heart was sore and angry, for that phrase, "It's only Polly," hurt her sadly. As if I wasn't anybody, hadn't any feelings, and was only made to amuse or work for people. Fan and Tom are both mistaken, and I'll show them that Polly is awake, she thought indignantly. Why shouldn't I enjoy myself as well as the rest? Besides, it's only Tom, she added with a bitter smile as she thought of Trix. Are you tired, Polly? Asked Tom, bending down to look into her face. Yes, of being nobody. Ah, but you ain't nobody. You're Polly. And you couldn't better that if you tried ever so hard, said Tom warmly, for he really was fond of Polly, and felt uncommonly so just then. I'm glad you think so anyway. It's so pleasant to be liked. And she looked up with her face quite bright again. I always did like you, don't you know, ever since that first visit. But you teased me shamefully for all that. So I did, but I don't now. Polly did not answer, and Tom asked with more anxiety than the occasion required, Do I, Polly? Not in the same way, Tom, she answered in a tone that didn't sound quite natural. Well, I never will again. Yes, you will. You can't help it. And Polly's eye glanced at Sidney, who was in front with Fan. Tom laughed and drew Polly closer as the crowds pressed, saying with mock tenderness, Didn't she like to be chaffed about her sweethearts? Well, she shan't be if I can help it. Poor dear, did she get her little bonnet knocked into a cocked hat and her little temper riled at the same time? Polly couldn't help laughing, and in spite of the crush, enjoyed the rather slow journey from seat to carriage. For Tom took such excellent care of her, she was quite sorry when it was over. They had a merry little supper after they got home, and Polly gave them a burlesque opera that convulsed her hearers, for her spirits rose again, and she was determined to get the last drop of fun before she went back to her humdrum life again. I've had a regularly splendid time, and thank you ever so much, she said, when the good nights were being exchanged. So have I. Let's go and do it again tomorrow, said Tom, holding the hand from which he had helped to pull a glove. Not for a long while, please. Too much pleasure would soon spoil me, answered Polly, shaking her head. I don't believe it. Good night, sweet Mistress Milton, as Sid called you. Sleep like an angel and dream of— I forgot. No teasing allowed. And Tom took himself off with a theatrical farewell. Now it's all over and done with, thought Polly, as she fell asleep after a long vigil. But it was not. And Polly's fun cost more than the price of gloves and bonnet, for having nibbled at the forbidden fruit, she had to pay the penalty. She only meant to have a good time, and there was no harm in that. But unfortunately she yielded to the various small temptations that beset pretty young girls, and did more mischief to others than to herself. Fanny's friendship grew cooler after that night. Tom kept wishing Trix was half as satisfactory as Polly, and Mr. Sidney began to build castles that had no foundation. Chapter 13. The Sunny Side. I've won the wager, Tom. Didn't know there was one. Don't you remember you said Polly would be tired of her teaching and give it up in 3 months, and I said she wouldn't? Well, isn't she? Not a bit of it. I thought she was at one time, and expected every day to have her come in with a long face and say she couldn't stand it. But somehow lately she is always bright and happy, seems to like her work, and doesn't have the tired, worried look she used to at first. The 3 months are out, so pay up, Tommy. All right, what will you have? You may make it gloves. I always need them. And Papa looks sober when I want money. There was a minute's pause as Fan returned to her practicing, and Tom relapsed into the reverie he was enjoying, seated astride of a chair, with his chin on his folded arms. Seems to me Polly don't come here as often as she used to, he said presently. No, she seems to be very busy. She has some new friends, I believe, old ladies, sewing girls, and things like that. I miss her, but I know she'll get tired of being goody and will come back to me before long. Don't be too sure of that, ma'am. Something in Tom's tone made Fan turn around and ask, What do you mean? Well, it strikes me that Sydney is one of Polly's new friends. Haven't you observed that she's uncommonly jolly? And doesn't that sort of thing account for it?" "Nonsense," said Fanny sharply. "Hope it is," coolly returned Tom. "What put that into your head?" demanded Fanny, twirling around again so that her face was hidden. "Oh, well, I keep meeting Sid and Polly circulating in the same directions. She looks as if she had found something uncommonly nice, and he looks as if all creation was getting Pollyfied pretty rapidly. Wonder you hadn't observed it." "I have." It was Tom's turn to look surprised now, for Fanny's voice sounded strange to him. He looked over her steadily for a minute, but saw only a rosy ear and a bent head. A cloud passed over his face, and he leaned his chin on his arm again with a despondent whistle, as he said to himself, "Poor Fan. Both of us in a scrape at once." "Don't you think it would be a good thing?" asked Fanny, after playing a bar or two very badly. "Yes, for Sid." "Not for Polly? Why, he's rich and clever, and better than most of you good-for-nothing fellows. What can the girl expect?" "Can't say, but I don't fancy the match myself." "Don't be a dog in the manger, Tom." "Bless your little heart, I only take a brotherly sort of interest in Polly. She's a capital girl, and she ought to marry a missionary or one of your reformer fellows, and be a shining light of some sort. I don't think setting up for a fine lady would suit her." "I think it would, and I hope she'll have the chance," said Fanny, evidently making an effort to speak kindly. "Good for you, Fan." And Tom gave an emphatic nod, as if her words meant more than she suspected. "Mind you," he added, "I don't know anything, and only fancied there might be some little flirtation going on, but I dare say it's nothing." "Time will show." Then Fan began to sing, and Tom's horse came, so he departed with the very unusual demonstration of a gentle pat on the head, as he said kindly, "That's right, my dear, keep jolly." It wasn't an elegant way of expressing sympathy, but it was hearty, and Fan thanked him for it, though she only said, "Don't break your neck, Tommy." When he was gone, Fan's song ended as suddenly as it began, and she sat thinking, with varying expressions of doubt and trouble passing rapidly across her face. "Well, I can't do anything but wait," she said at last, slamming the music book together with a desperate look. "Yes, I can," she added a minute after. "It's Polly's holiday. I can go and see her, and if there's anything in it, I shall find it out." Fanny dropped her face into her hands with a little shiver as she said that, then got up, looking as pale and resolute as if going to meet some dreadful doom, and putting on her things, went away to Polly's as fast as dignity would allow. Saturday morning was Polly's clearing-up day, and Fan found her with a handkerchief tied over her head and a big apron on, just putting the last touches to the tidy little room, which was as fresh and bright as air, water, and a pair of hands could make it. "All ready for company. I'll just whisk off my regimentals, and Polly, the maid, becomes Polly the missus. It was lovely of you to come early. Take off your things. Another new bonnet, you extravagant wretch. How is your mother and Maudie? It's a nice day, and we'll have a walk, won't we?" By the time Polly's welcome was uttered, she had got Fan on the little sofa beside her, and was smiling at her in such an infectious manner that Fan couldn't help smiling back. "I came to see what you've been doing with yourself lately. You don't come and report, and I got anxious about you," said Fanny, looking into the clear eyes before her. "I've been so busy, and I knew you wouldn't care to hear about my doings, for they aren't the sort you like," answered Polly. "Your lessons didn't used to take up all your time. It's my private opinion that you're taking as well as giving lessons, miss," said Fan, putting on a playfully stern air to hide her real anxiety. "Yes, I am," answered Polly soberly. "In what? Love?" A quick color came to Polly's cheeks as she laughed and said, looking away, "No, friendship and good works." "Oh, indeed? May I ask who is your teacher?" "I've more than one, but Miss Mills is head teacher." "She instructs in good works. who gives the friendship lessons." "Such pleasant girls. I wish you knew them, Fan. So clever and energetic and kind and happy. It always does me good to see them," cried Polly with a face full of enthusiasm. "Is that all?" And Fan gave her a curious look of mingled disappointment and relief. "There, I told you my doings would not interest you, and they don't. They sound flat and prosy after your brilliant adventures. Let's change the subject," said Polly, looking relieved herself. "Dear me, which of our sweethearts sends us little dainty bouquets of violets so early in the morning?" asked Fanny, suddenly spying the purple cluster in a graceful little vase on the piano. "He sends me one every week. He knows I love them so." And Polly's eyes turned that way, full of pride and pleasure. "I'd no idea he was so devoted," said Fanny, stooping to smell the flowers, and at the same time read a card that lay near them. "You needn't plague me about it. Now you know it, I never speak of our fondness for one another, because such things seem silly to other people. Will isn't all that Jimmy was to me, but he tries to be, and I love him dearly for it." "Will?" Fanny's voice quite startled Polly, it was so sharp and sudden, and her face grew red and pale all in a minute, as she upset the little vase with the start she gave. "Yes, of course. Who did you think I meant?" asked Polly, sopping up the water before it damaged her piano. "Never mind. I thought you might be having a quiet little flirtation with somebody. I feel responsible, you know, because I told your mother I'd look after you. The flowers are all right. My head aches so I hardly know what I'm doing this morning." Fanny spoke fast and laughed uncomfortably as she went back to the sofa, wondering if Polly had told her a lie. Polly seemed to guess at her thoughts as she saw the card, and turning toward her she held it up, saying with a conscious look in her eyes, "You thought Mr. Sidney sent them? Well, you're mistaken. And the next time you want to know anything, please ask straight out. I like it better than talking at cross purposes. Now, my dear, don't be angry. I was only teasing you in fun. Tom took it into his foolish head that something was going on, and I felt a natural interest, you know." "Tom? What does he know or care about my affairs?" demanded Polly. "He met you two in the street. Pretty often, I think, and being in a sentimental mood himself, he got up a romance for you and Sidney. I'm much obliged to him for his interest, but it's quite wasted, thank you." Fan's next proceeding gave her friend another surprise, for, being rather ashamed of herself, very much relieved, and quite at a loss what to say, she took refuge in a hysterical fit of tears, which changed Polly's anger into tenderness at once. "Is that the trouble she's been hiding all winter? Poor dear, I wish I'd known it sooner," thought Polly, as she tried to soothe her with comfortable pats, sniffs of cologne, and sympathizing remarks upon the subject of headache, carefully ignoring that other feminine affliction, the heartache. "There, I feel better. I've been needing a good cry for some time, and now I shall be all right. Never mind it, Polly. I'm nervous and tired. I've danced too much lately, and dyspepsia makes me blue." And Fanny wiped her eyes and laughed. "Of course it does. You need rest and petting, and here I've been scolding you, when I ought to have been kind. Now tell me, what can I do for you?" said Polly, with a remorseful face. "Talk to me and tell me all about yourself. You don't seem to have as many worries as other people. What's the secret, Polly?" And Fan looked up with wet eyes and a wistful face at Polly, who was putting little dabs of cologne all over her head. "Well," said Polly slowly, "I just try to look on the bright side of things. That helps one amazingly. Why, you've no idea how much goodness and sunshine you can get out of the most unpromising things if you make the best of them." "I don't know how," said Fan despondently. "You can learn. I did. I used to croak and fret dreadfully and get so unhappy. I wasn't fit for anything. I still do it more than I ought, but I try not to, and it gets easier, I find. Get atop of your troubles, and they are half cured, Miss Mills says." "Everything is so contrary and provoking," said Fanny petulantly. "Now what in the world have you to fret about?" asked Polly, rather anxiously. "Quantities of things." began Fan, and then stopped, for somehow she felt ashamed to own that she was afflicted because she couldn't have a new set of furs, go to Paris in the spring, and make Mr. Sidney love her. She handed up something more presentable, and said in a despairing tone, "Well, Mother's very poorly. Tom and Trix quarrel all the time. Maud gets more and more wilful every day, and Papa is worried about his affairs." "A sad state of things, but nothing very desperate. Can't you lend a hand anywhere? That might do good all around." "No, I haven't the talent for managing people, but I see what ought to be done." "Well, don't just wail about it. Keep yourself happy if you can. It will help other people to see you cheerful." "Just what Tom said. Keep jolly, but, dear me, how can one when everything is so stupid and tiresome?" "If ever a girl needed work, it's you," cried Polly. "You began to be a young lady so early that you're tired of everything at 22. I wish you'd go at something, then you'd find how much talent and energy you really had. I know ever so many girls who are just like me, sick to death of fashionable life, but don't know what to take in its place. I'd like to travel, but Papa says he can't afford it, so I can only drag about and get on as I may. I pity you rich girls so much. You have so many opportunities and don't seem to know how to use them. I suppose I should do just the same in your place, but it seems now as if I could be very happy and useful with plenty of money. You are that without it. There, I won't croak any more. Let's go and take a good walk, and don't you tell anyone how I came by and cried like a baby." "Never," cried Polly, putting on her bonnet. "I ought to go and make calls," said Fanny, "but I don't feel now as if I ever wanted to see any of the girls again. Dreadful state of mind, isn't it? Suppose you come and see some of my friends instead. They're not fine or ceremonious, but lively, odd, and pleasant. Come, it'll amuse you." "I will," cried Fanny, whose spirits seemed improved by the shower. "Nice little old lady, isn't she?" added Fan, as she caught sight of Miss Mills on their way out, sitting at a table piled with work, and sewing away with an energy that made the grey curls vibrate. "Saint Mehitable, I call her. Now there is a rich woman who knew how to get happiness out of her money," said Polly as they walked away. "She was poor till she was nearly 50. Then a comfortable fortune was left her, and she knew just how to use it. The house was given to her, but instead of living in it all alone, she filled it with poor gentlefolk who needed neat, respectable homes, but couldn't get anything comfortable for their little money. I'm one of them, and I know the worth of what she does for me. 2 old widow ladies live below me, several students overhead. Poor Mrs. Keene and her lame boy have the back parlor, and Jenny the little bedroom next to Miss Mills. Each pays what they can. That's independent and makes us feel better, but that dear woman does 1,000 things that money can't pay for, and we feel her influence all through the house. I'd rather be married and have a home of my own, but next to that, I should like to be an old maid like Miss Mills." Polly's sober face and emphatic tone made Fanny laugh, and at the cheery sound, a young girl pushing a baby carriage looked around and smiled. "What lovely eyes," whispered Fanny. "Yes, that's little Jane," returned Polly, adding when she had passed, with a nod and a friendly, "Don't get tired, Jenny." "We help one another out at our house, and every fine morning Jenny takes Johnny Keene out when she goes for her own walk. That gives his mother time to rest, does both the children good, and keeps things neighborly. Miss Mills suggested it, and Jenny is so glad to do anything for anybody, it's a pleasure to let her. You've seen 2 of my new friends, Miss Mills and Jenny. Now I'll show you 2 more," said Polly presently, as they reached a door, and she led the way up several flights of public stairs. "Rebecca Jeffrey is a regularly splendid girl, full of talent. She won't let us call it genius. She will be famous some day, I know. She's so modest and yet so intent on her work. Lizzie Small is an engraver, and designs the most delightful little pictures. Becky and she live together, and take care of one another. This studio's their home. They work, they eat, they sleep, and they live here, going halves in everything. They are all alone in the world, but as happy and independent as birds. Real friends, whom nothing will part. Let a lover come between them, and their friendship won't last long, said Fanny. I think it will. Take a look at them and you'll change your mind, answered Polly, tapping at a door on which 2 modest cards were tacked. Come in, said a voice, and obeying, Fanny found herself in a large, strangely furnished room, lighted from above and occupied by 2 girls. One stood before a great clay figure in a corner. This one was tall, with a strong face, keen eyes, short curly hair, and a fine head. Fanny was struck at once by this face and figure, though the one was not handsome, and the other half hidden by a great pinafore covered with clay. At a table where the light was clearest, sat a frail-looking girl with a thin face, big eyes, and pale hair, a dreamy, absorbed little person, who bent over a block, skillfully wielding her tools. Becky and Bess, how do you do? This is my friend Fanny Shaw. We're out on a rampage, so go on with your work and let us lazy ones look on and admire. As Polly spoke, both girls looked up and nodded smilingly. Bess gave Fan the one easy chair. Becky took an artistic survey of the newcomer, with eyes that seemed to see everything. Then each went on with her work, and all began to talk. You're just what I want, Polly. Pull up your sleeve and give me an arm while you sit. The muscles here aren't right, and you've got just what I want, said Becky, slapping the round arm of the statue, at which Fan was gazing with awe. How do you get on? Asked Polly, throwing off her cloak and rolling up her sleeves as if going to washing. Slowly. The idea is working itself clear, and I follow as fast as my hands can. Is the face better, do you think? Said Becky, taking off a wet cloth and showing the head of the statue. How beautiful it is! Cried Fanny, staring at it with increased respect. What does it mean to you? Asked Rebecca, turning to her with a sudden shine in her keen eyes. I don't know whether it's meant for a saint or a muse, or a goddess or a fate, but to me it's only a beautiful woman, bigger, lovelier, and more imposing than any woman I ever saw, answered Fanny slowly, trying to express the impression the statue made upon her. Rebecca smiled brightly, and Bess looked around to nod approvingly. But Polly clapped her hands and said, Well done, Fan. I didn't think you'd get the idea so well, but you have. I'm proud of your insight. Now I'll tell you, for Becky will let me, since you've paid her the compliment of understanding her work. Some time ago, we got into a famous talk about what women should be, and Becky said she'd show us her idea of the coming woman. There she is, as you say, bigger, lovelier, and more imposing than any we see nowadays, and at the same time, she is a true woman. See what a fine forehead, yet the mouth is both firm and tender, as if it could say strong, wise things, as well as teach children and kiss babies. We couldn't decide what to put in the hands as the most appropriate symbol. What do you say? Give her a scepter. She would make a fine queen, answered Fanny. No, we've had enough of that. Women have been called queens a long time, but the kingdom given them isn't worth ruling, answered Rebecca. I don't think it is nowadays, said Fanny with a tired sort of sigh. Ha! Give her a ballot box, cried a new voice, and turning around, they saw an odd-looking woman perched on a sofa behind them. Thank you for that suggestion, Kate. I'll put that with the other symbols at her feet, for I'm going to have a needle, a pen, a palette, and a broom somewhere, to suggest the various talents she owns. And the ballot box will show that she has earned the right to use them. How goes it? And Rebecca offered a clay-daubed hand, which the newcomer cordially shook. Who is that? Fanny whispered to Polly, who had subsided into a corner. Why, it's Kate King, the authoress. Bless me, how rude not to introduce you. Here, my King, is an admirer of yours, Fanny Shaw, and my well-beloved friend, cried Polly, presenting Fan, who regarded the shabby young woman with as much respect as if she had been arrayed in velvet and ermine. For Kate had written a successful book by accident, and happened to be the fashion just then. "It's time for lunch, girls. I brought mine along with me. It's so much jollier to eat in sisterhood. Let's club together and have a revel," said Kate, producing a bag of oranges and several big plummy buns. "We've got sardines, crackers, and cheese," said Bess, clearing off a table with all speed. "Wait a bit, and I'll add my share," cried Polly, catching up her cloak as she ran off to the grocery store nearby. "You'll be shocked at our performances, Miss Shaw, but you can call it a picnic and never tell what dreadful things you saw us do," said Rebecca, polishing a paint knife by rubbing it up and down in a pot of ivy, while Kate spread forth the feast in several odd plates and a flat shell or two. "Let's have coffee to finish off with. Put on the pot, Bess, and skim the milk," added Becky, as she produced cups, mugs, and a queer little vase to supply drinking vessels for the party. "Here's nuts, a pot of jam, and some cake. Fan likes sweet things, and we want to be elegant when we have company," said Polly, flying in again and depositing her share on the table. "Then fall to, ladies, and help yourselves. Never mind if the china doesn't hold out. Take the sardines by their little tails and wipe your fingers on my brown paper napkins," said Kate, setting the example with such a relish that the others followed it in a gale of merriment. Fanny had been to many elegant lunches, but never enjoyed one more than that droll picnic in the studio, for there was a freedom about it that was charming, an artistic flavor to everything, and such a spirit of goodwill and gaiety that she felt at home at once. As they ate, the others talked, and she listened, finding it as interesting as any romance to hear these young women discuss their plans, ambitions, successes, and defeats. It was a new world to her, and they seemed a different race of creatures from the girls whose lives were spent in dress, gossip, pleasure, or ennui. They were girls still full of spirits, fun, and youth, but below the light-heartedness each cherished a purpose which seemed to ennoble her womanhood, to give her a certain power, a sustaining satisfaction, a daily stimulus that led her on to daily effort, and in time to some success in circumstance or character, which was worth all the patience, hope, and labor of her life. Fanny was just then in the mood to feel the beauty of this, for the sincerest emotion she had ever known was beginning to make her dissatisfied with herself and the aimless life she led. Men must respect such girls as these, she thought. Yes, and I love them too, for in spite of their independence, they are womanly. I wish I had a talent to live for, if it would do as much for me as it does for them. It is this sort of thing that is improving Polly, that makes her society interesting to Sydney, and herself so dear to everyone. Money can't buy these things for me, and I want them very much. As these thoughts were passing through her mind, Fanny was hearing all sorts of topics discussed with feminine enthusiasm and frankness. Art, morals, politics, society, books, religion, housekeeping, dress, and economy. For the minds and tongues roved from subject to subject with youthful rapidity, and seemed to get something from the dullest and the driest. "By the way, Polly, I've got some tickets for you," said Kate. "People are always sending me such things, and as I don't care for them, I'm glad to make them over to you. These are passes for the exhibition. Becky shall have those. Here are the concert tickets for you, my musical girl. And this one is for a course of lectures on literature, which I'll keep for myself." As Kate dealt out the colored cards to the grateful girls, Fanny took a good look at her, wondering if the time would ever come when women could earn a little money and success without paying such a heavy price for them. For Kate looked sick, tired, and too early old. Then her eye went to the unfinished statue, and she said impulsively, "I hope you'll put that in marble and show us what we ought to be." "I wish I could," and an intense desire shone in Rebecca's face as she saw her faulty work and felt how fair her model was. For a minute the 5 young women sat silent, looking up at the beautiful, strong figure before them, each longing to see it done, and each unconscious that she was helping by her individual effort and experience to bring the day when their noblest idea of womanhood should be embodied in flesh and blood, not clay. The city bells rung 1 o'clock, and Polly started up. "I must go, for I promised a neighbor of mine a lesson at 2. "I thought this was a holiday," said Fanny. "So it is, but this is a little labor of love and doesn't spoil the day at all. The child has talent, loves music, and needs help. I can't give her money, but I can teach her, so I do, and she's the most promising pupil I have. Help one another is part of the religion of our sisterhood, Fan." "I must put you in a story, Polly. I want a heroine, and you will do," said Kate. "Me? Why, there never was such a humdrum, unromantic thing as I am," cried Polly, amazed. "I've booked you nevertheless, so in you go, but you may add as much romance as you like. It's time you did." "I'm ready for it when it comes, but it can't be forced, you know." And Polly blushed and smiled as if some little spice of that delightful thing had stolen into her life, for all its prosaic seeming. "I like your friends very much," said Fanny as they left. "I was afraid I should find them mannish and rough or sentimental and conceited, but they are simple, sensible creatures, full of talent and all sorts of fine things. I admire and respect them and want to go again, if I may." "Oh, Fan, I'm so glad. I hoped you'd like them. I knew they'd do you good, and I'll take you any time, for you stood the test better than I expected. Becky asked me to bring you again, and she seldom does that for fashionable young ladies, let me tell you." "I want to be so much better, and I think you and they might show me how," said Fanny, with a traitorous tremble in her voice. "We'll show you the sunny side of poverty and work, and that is a useful lesson for anyone," Miss Mills said, answered Polly, hoping that Fan would learn how much the poor can teach the rich, and what helpful friends girls may be to one another. Thank you for joining us for Stories Come to Life. Be sure to join us next time when we continue to listen to An Old-Fashioned Girl by Louisa May Alcott. Please be sure to tell me what other books you'd like to listen to. I'm so glad you joined me. I'll talk to you again soon.